Good evening. Namaskar. So I'm very happy to be here tonight on this occasion to just say a brief word of welcome in honor of our distinguished guest, Radhanath Swami. It's an honor to have him here, and I'm sure already through devotion, through bhajans, you have been preparing yourself for this spiritual moment. But I think a gathering like this in the Kennedy School with such a guest really reminds us of the origins of the university and the purposes of places like the 50-year-old Center for the Study of World Religions. Not simply where we study about religion, but where we study religiously, and where the ideas and the experiences and the emotions and the practices all come together, yes, in an academic way, yes, in a critical way, but also in a way that can open us up and touch our hearts as well. So even on that level, I'm very happy to be here and say this word of welcome tonight. I also have had the privilege for some almost 40 years now of studying Hinduism in one form or another. Since after college, I went to Kathmandu, Nepal, and spent 2 years teaching at a boarding school where all the boys in the school were Hindu and Buddhist. And by being there, I became exposed for the first time as a very young person to the riches of Hindu culture and Buddhist culture. I was impressed even then, some almost 40 years ago, by the bhajans, by the devotion of the students, by visiting temples, by going to festivals, and by sharing that experience. And over the past almost 40 years, knowing there is a kind of endless depth to Hindu religious tradition in all its varieties, in the great text and the great commentaries, in the theology and philosophy, but also in the simple devotion and the practices that so many of you tonight share as a basic part of your lives. I also know, and I'm happy to know, that the tradition that Radhanath Swami represents is a very, very important and very, very old tradition in India. No one here needs to be reminded tonight that the International Society for Krishna's Consciousness did not simply begin in 1965 or 1967. Many things don't begin until they come to New York, but this is one that is the exception and older. I had the privilege a few years back of being academic director for the Center of Hindu Studies at Oxford University. And I met there many fine young scholars who come from the ISKCON background, studying Vaishnavism in various ways at the University of Oxford, and bringing to bear the latest critical thinking, academic study, language learning, with the devotion of the tradition. So back to Chaitanya Prabhu, Rupa Goswami, Jiva Goswami, and all the great Goswamis through the generations, knowing this is an incredibly rich, powerful tradition with a great heritage of learning that really in the 1960s simply crossed over and came to the United States and to the West. And it's a wonderful thing to see that a tradition like this can draw out such a crowd on a Tuesday night, just before Thanksgiving, to share both the devotion but also the learning of this great tradition. I also more personally feel that when I was reading a while back Radhanath Swami's book, Returning Home, The Journey Home, that in some ways our lives are not quite the same, but also have a certain kind of symmetry to them. We're about the same age, Chicago, New York, being in that generation of searching, the 1960s, the turmoil in the streets, people looking for new beginnings, people finding themselves or losing themselves religiously in those years. India became a part of both of our lives, as I've just mentioned, but I think it was around the same time that we found our vocations, we found our devotion, we found the calling that God gave to us. And in reading the book, I was kind of looking into a kind of mirror where nothing is quite the same, but there are many issues about your devotion, your love, your search when you're young, and then how over a series of years and journeys in life, you begin to experience that deeper and deeper and see all of your life in that perspective. So I was particularly happy when I was invited to come tonight to finally meet for the first time and to realize that our lives have much in common then, and also at this moment, our lives can intertwine. And then too, in the book, I think it's kind of a paradigm or a model. I'm sure many of you have already read it. You know that it's about the unpredictable nature of the search for God and how God works in our lives, in our families, in our upbringing in so many different ways, And that when you're older, when you look back to your youth, you could never say, well, this was all predictable, or this was all happening because it was planned from the beginning. It may be divine providence, and it may be a plan that God has for us, but we rarely know that plan when we are young. And to see in Swami's life how he went on his journey and found his way around India in the most interesting circumstances and the most interesting events. As I mentioned when I wrote about the book in one of my blogs, my visits to India have been much less interesting. I tend to say I went to the library and I studied, and then I went back to my room and I did interesting things like that, but your life was a series of events that could be a movie someday, I'm sure. But I think the deeper point of it is that as we live our lives and as we experience the things that happen around us, God is calling to us, God is speaking to us, God is drawing us forth. And to see that Swami then, some 30, 40 years ago, was able to hear that call in miraculous ways, to meet Prabhupada Maharaj, to be in his presence, to feel the call, to touch his feet, to receive initiation, and then to say, and for the rest of my life, I will live that out, is a beautiful thing. There are many ways we can see beauty in this world, but one of the most beautiful is when somebody hears the voice of God when they're young and continues to hear that voice through the rest of their life. And the final thing I would say, because you didn't come here tonight to hear me, would be to say that I think it's wonderful that Swami has come here tonight, has written the book, has shared the experience, because I think we realize that if we, in our various points in life, receive the gift, and we're touched in various ways by God, it is not something to put in our pocket and keep for ourselves. It is not something to be selfish about, to hide away, but to write it down, to experience it, to share the joy, perhaps to dance or sing, to go around and share the wisdom with others, brothers and sisters of many backgrounds and many other journeys. And I'm sure tonight that by hearing Swami speak simply, directly from the heart about his experience, we'll also be remembering both how God has touched him and also how God in many ways is touching us even as we are gathered here tonight. So on that note, I will simply say thank you and welcome.